Welcome, everyone, to the third Thursday meetup of the West Orlando WordPress Meetup Group. I'm Rob Watson, a co-organizer and host. West Orlando WordPress is an official WordPress meetup group affiliated with the WordPress Orlando and WordCamp US meetup groups. As we venture into the future, we lean on history. The original internet artists, or net artists, working in the early 1990s, created artworks using the internet. Before the New York Times got online, artists like Mark America, Olia Lealina, and Jody were using the internet as their artistic medium. Their demos are included in this presentation. For them, the internet was a new frontier, novel and unexplored. But this was before WordPress, and before most of us were truly aware of the internet and its capabilities. Newer tools like Full Site Editor provide a true no-code experience to website creators everywhere. Now, more people have the opportunity to create online and actively participate in the internet landscape. Plus, everyone can start an internet company and create internet art. But what do we actually do once we rediscover the original internet artists? We learn from their innovation and fearless approach to new technologies. Artificial intelligence is a new dilemma for artists of all kinds, especially those already working in tech. These trailblazers offer us an invaluable lesson in innovation and a fearless approach to embracing new technologies, in particular, artificial intelligence or AI. By examining the pioneering spirits of the original internet artists, we uncover a wellspring of creativity, adaptability, and resilience that can empower today's artists to harness the potential of AI. Rachel Winchester, or Win for short, is an independent product designer at Visual Webmaster LLC and the founder of the Focus Assistants. Catch her hosting the Philly WordPress Meetup. Win began her career by teaching herself digital marketing, participating in WordPress meetups, and creating arts-related websites for fun. She deepened her knowledge by completing a UX design bootcamp while building websites for artists, academics, and entrepreneurs. Recently, she completed a contract with Digital Cube, working on their WordPress hosting products, client websites, and other user initiatives. Drawing on her art history and interpretation theory studies from Swarthmore College, Win is always looking to collaborate with other technologists, creatives, and entrepreneurs in innovative ways. At this point, I'd like to invite everyone to mute their microphones for the presentation. Win, thank you for being our presenter this evening. The time is now yours.
Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me to present to your meetup. This is definitely one of my favorite topics to talk about. I first presented WordPress as a paintbrush last year at WordCamp Montclair, and I don't think I've presented it since. So I'm really happy to revisit one of my favorite presentations. So this presentation, again, is called WordPress as a Paintbrush, Internet Art Then and Now. Again, my name is Rachel Winchester. You can just call me Win for short. There's definitely a lot of Rachels out in the world, so you can just call me Win. And I am a product designer. My company is called Visual Webmaster LLC, and you can find me at visualwebmaster.com. This presentation is a web page, and it's on my website, so I can copy and paste that into the chat for you as well. So you can keep all the links and and visit them all later. Right. So just a little bit about me before we get into the presentation, and this definitely helps me explain internet art and explain the content of the presentation, because technology changes so fast, and art and culture changes along with it. So it helps to kind of have that perspective, either as my own timeline and my background and perspective, or your own timeline, thinking back in your life, what were you doing at this point in history? So a little bit about me. My background started with art. In 2017, I graduated with a bachelor's in art history. And then I started working at contemporary art museums and galleries. I worked at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. I worked in a couple other historic houses and smaller museums, galleries, giving tours, working in the education department, doing all different things, just working with the art and talking about the art all day. And that was really fun. And it was so fun that I even started making websites about art. And those websites were made with WordPress. So around 2019, 2020, I realized that I'd rather work with WordPress than really work in an art museum. So I took a UX design bootcamp in 2020 to learn about product design. And that's really when I'd say I shifted my focus from art to products. And now I am an independent product designer. I mostly make websites, of course, and presentations as well as concept art. So think back to your own perspective and background and how you might relate to the art that I talk about or the technology that I talk about as I go through this presentation. So first, the presentation is structured in 3 parts. I start with net art using a capital N and a capital A. I'll explain that a little further. And how the original net artists really set the stage for all the creativity that artists were doing online afterwards. Then I'll go into WordPress and how WordPress came on the scene, democratized publishing, and really changed the way that people use the internet and what we can create online. Then after that, I'll talk about what do we do now? What do we do in the future now that we have revisited the past and learned about these artists? What do we do now with all this technology that we have going into the future? So let's start with net art. And you'll notice that I'm using a capital N and a capital A. It's also called internet art with a capital I. And to set the stage, let's go back to the 90s. Let's go back to the early 90s specifically. So think back, what were you doing in the early 90s? How many people in the room had computers in the early 90s? You can answer in the chat if you'd like. I have some photos from things that were happening and different imagery that was around from my research. I actually was not yet on the earth in the early 90s. So I had to do some research to see what was going on. There's Game Boys and VCRs and CDs, different historical events and cultural events happening. Just think back to the early 90s. This is about when the internet came on the scene in the early 90s. The general public started, when the general public first got online, many people were using this type of computer, the Apple Macintosh 2. So if, I'd also like to know if anyone in the room has had this computer. That's always interesting. But this is the type of computer people were using to get online and to create websites. The history of computers isn't exactly the same as the history of the internet. This is a short history of the World Wide Web in the early 90s. In 1991, the first internet service provider came about. It was called The World, and that was how people were able to get online. They were physically got that internet connection. By 1992, around 1 million people have gotten that internet connection, and 1 million people are online. 1 million isn't really a large number. I'm in Brooklyn right now. In my bio, before I mentioned, it was mentioned that I run the Philadelphia WordPress Meetup, and I do live in Philly half the time, so I'm actually a digital nomad. But Philly is much larger than 1 million people. So 1 million people online in 1992 is not a lot of people. And then by 1994, HTML, a markup language, was released to the public. So this was the first tool that the public was given to be able to create websites and create things online. Now people are starting to get online. So it went in this order. It started with the government. The World Wide Web was a government project. So the government was using it first. Then it spread to universities, especially ones related to the government, but also just for educational purposes and research. Then corporations were able to get online, especially the ones who had the financial capacity and the space for all those computers. And then it was released to the public. This is about when the first internet artists started to get online, to get computers, and to use the internet. And they were using the internet to do a lot of things, and especially create art. All right. Oh, I think, did we mention earlier, I am keeping an eye on the chat just for if there are any questions, like if I need to clarify anything. But I will be available for a few minutes after the presentation to answer some questions as well. And then you can always reach out to me to answer any more questions at any time. All right, so the first internet artists are finally getting online. So what is internet art? This is I'll explain it to you using these words, but obviously I think once you see some examples, it'll make more sense. So internet art is conceptual art, it's digital art, and it's internet centric. So conceptual means that it's relating to or based on mental concepts. It's mostly about the idea or what the art object represents rather than what you're actually looking at. It's about what it represents. It's digital in that it uses electronic technology that generates, stores, and processes data. So yes, the internet relies on digital technologies to work. You need computers and servers and Wi-Fi and all that stuff. And then specifically for internet art, we call it that because it's internet centric. So it's not only built with the internet, but it's mostly about the internet. So those concepts that it's relating to are about the internet. So what's the internet? The internet is a global computer network for information and communication. All right, so here are some early examples of internet art that will explain a lot better what it is, a lot better than just me explaining with words. So the first example is by Jodi, Jodi. This is an arts duo. Two people create Jodi. It's Joan Heemskerk and Dirk Paesmans. They're from somewhere in Scandinavia, or maybe somewhere else in Europe, but they're up there. And this was made in 1995. This was referred to as code poetry. So the demo I'm going to show you, the artwork is called www.jodi.org. So this is a really fun artwork, and I'm actually going to show it to you in this YouTube video because the original artwork at that domain hasn't been preserved. So that's one thing that happens with history and trying to look back at artifacts that were created a long time ago. They've been preserved in different ways. So I'm actually just going to show a video of someone going through the original artwork. Right. So when you load the screen, you see all these characters, all these green characters in a black background, and it's actually just one giant link. When you click into the link, it turns into this another screen made of the same kind of like neon lines and colors, but you can see it's actually a map. It's like you can see a little bit of like New England or the Northeast right there, and there are these neon red labels. You can see she hovers her cursor over the red labels, and these are actually links. So you can see that they have made a map that is actually a navigation. It's a sitemap. So this is a really fun artwork. I think it's the more you go into it, the funnier it gets to me. At first, I thought like, oh, this is such serious, such scary stuff. But then I see like they're just having fun with colors and neon lights, and they're having fun with links and HTML. I'm going to go through more just to show you all the creative screens that they're coming up with using just HTML. So again, this was called Code Poetry, and yeah, they're just having fun with it. There's a lot of videos on YouTube of people going through this artwork. And what you'll notice is that not every screen is just one giant button. a lot of screens have a lot of buttons all over the place, which means that depending on what you click on, depending on where you click and what you click on, you can create a new story and a new experience every time you go through the artwork. So it's interactive and it's customizable based on your own experience. So here's a quote that explains in their words how what they were doing. When you work with computers, you have sound and you have image, but in the computer, you also have code, and we tried to play with that a lot. I hope you guys have fun going through Jody's artwork. That's not only their artwork, but their own personal website, although it hasn't been preserved. So I'll look more into where they've moved their stuff, because there's no way it's just disappeared. And maybe this is a good place for me to show you guys where you can find some more internet art. So I'm actually going to just go over here to this screen right here. This site is anthology.rhizome.org. So this is a research project that is conducted by the New Museum in New York. And it's a giant archive of all the net art that they could find. It's archived very well. It's they have a nice introduction and explanation of all the artworks. But here's a place where you can find a whole lot more works. I'm going to add this in the chat right now. I'd also like to mention that the 3 artworks that I've chosen to show you in the presentation, they're not necessarily like the best or the I don't know, most expensive. A lot of people try to figure out like, oh, what was the most important one of the era, and it's I've just chosen these 3 because these are the ones that have come up a lot in my research, and they're very different. So they help me explain how diverse internet art was. So my next example is by Olia Lealina. It was made in 1996, and she referred to this as net film or net theater. Olia Lealina was a pioneer and an organizer and a curator. She was a pioneer in that she organized a lot of the net artists who are working with her and around her, and she was kind of taking the initiative to organize and set up a mailing list so that they could communicate and talk about what they were doing, share their artwork, and they were very consciously putting together a definition of internet art. They were talking about what they were doing and saying like, this is internet art, this isn't, this is what it should be called, this is how it should be defined, and this is what we're doing. So she is a huge pioneer and organizer in that way. So the artwork I'm going to show to you is called My Boyfriend Came Back from the War. It's at the website teleportacia.org. I'm just going to get some water real quick. All right, so when I load the site, this sentence appears in the top right corner. It reads, "My boyfriend came back from the war. After dinner, they left us alone." So this is how she sets up this narrative. Again, she calls this a net film or net theater. So I'm going to click on this link and see what happens. This low-res image loads up very slowly. You can see a couple people to the left and a window on the right. The couple, it's a button, so I'll click on the button, see what happens. The image just moved to the left, and another image is loading slowly on the right. And now the image on the left is flickering a bit. So what's happening with the images loading slowly and these things flickering is she's creating some movement and she's creating action. And by dividing the screens with these iframes right here. By dividing the browser screen like that, she's separating the stage. So she's using the browser as a stage for a scene, and that's where the film or the theater comes from. I'm just going to keep clicking through and see what unfolds, see the story that she's telling. Where are you? I can't see you. Let me click through here. Forget it. There's different things that are interactable on the screen. So there's different buttons. So just like before with Jody's artwork, there are different paths that I could take go to experience the artwork depending on what I want to click on and when. So I'm having my own like custom and unique experience. I'll click on this link down here. So I won't have time to go through the whole artwork because again, it's theater, it's film, so it's essentially a whole play will unfold. But I'll drop the original link in the chat, and it's also in the web page presentation. But here it is separately as well. You go back to the presentation. Oh, there we go. I should have had that open in a new tab. All right. Okay, so what I like so much about Oliolina's artwork or net film is that it was a happy accident. She is quoted saying that I was not very fond of this format back then. I would have preferred it to be a video, but animated GIF was the only way to get a moving image in the browser. In other words, she was trying to create a movie or create a play inside the browser. But in 1995, using the tools available to her, that's all that she could make. So it's a really interesting way to interpret an internet theater or net film. Right. And this last example I'm going to show you is by Mark America. It was first published in 1997. However, it was first conceived in 1995, and it's an epic novel. It's not just an epic novel, it's very meta. So the story is epic, and the story itself is long. There's 400 web pages, but also the project is epic. So he is always iterating on it, always adding to it, because technology continues to change. So he has to keep adding to the project to mimic how technology is continuing to change along with the internet. So this artwork was selected for the 2000 Whitney Biennial, which is like a really huge distinction. The Whitney Biennial is kind of like winning a Grammy, but for contemporary art. So it's very it's frequently referenced artwork, and it's like I said, it's very epic in a lot of ways. So the URL for Grammatron, I'll copy the in here again, so you have this separately as well. And it loads this cover screen. You can see there's a common thing with early internet art. They always have this cover screen. And I am going to click into the lower bandwidth version, Abe Golem. I'm going to do the lower bandwidth version just because that one came first. And I think, you know, doing this history lesson, it's good to start with the earliest examples, right? So let me get some water before I read this. Okay, so the opening paragraph, Abe Golem. Abe Golem, legendary info shaman, cracker of the sorcerer code and creator of Grammatron and Nanoscript, sat behind his computer, every speck of creative ore long since excavated from his burnt-out brain, wondering how he was going to survive in the electrosphere he had once called home. His glazed donut eyes were spacing out into the vast electric desert, looking for more words to transcribe his personal loss of meaning. I'm Abe Golem, an old man. I drove a sign to the end of the road and then I got lost. Find me. So it's a pretty grim start to the story. He is coming to the end of the earth and he's approached with this new world and he feels lost. You see in this text, there's quite a few links. So just like the previous artworks, depending on what I click on, it depends what I will read next. So it's very much a story that depends on what I do. And I have to interact with it. And some places have only one link, just so that we can see even more paths that start. So the story is essentially about a man, Abe Golem, who, because of this new technology, he has a dilemma. So he is an author, a creator, an artist, and this new technology is changing the whole landscape. Should he go into the world and get lost? How will he find himself? I a little bit more before some of these paths go down places that I haven't seen yet. So let me go back to the presentation, and that's Mark America. I'll talk a little bit more about this artwork at the end, but this quote explains a lot of the inspiration behind why he started Grammatron. So what is kind of scary is the possibility of never reaching production closure because of the advent of all these software applications. So the story in Grammatron never ends because it's non-linear, because it isn't just one long stream of text like a traditional novel, and because we can click on different links and explore the story in a lot of different directions. There isn't really an end. All of the pages are interlinked, and you just end up going through this ever winding path. There isn't an end. It sometimes feels like those what are they called? Like create your own story novels, where you're like given a prompt and then you have to say, choose which page to turn to next. But even those novels will have an end or a few endings. This hypertext novel is just a world that you continuously explore with no end. So that's what he's calling hypertext literature, and he inspired a lot of other novelists from this project. But the story never ends. This quote explains that because the story never ends because the technology is never ending. It's always evolving and it's always going in so many different directions. So the project also will never end. He's iterated on Grammatron so many different times. I don't think he even counts anymore. And he's become a professor and does this with his students every semester or so. So it's an ever evolving experience and project and story, and it's just all of that in one. All right, so all of these artists, Mark America, Jody, Olia Lealina, they were doing what they were doing around the time or even before the New York Times got online. So in many ways, they beat the times. Just think about that in terms of artistic innovation and business innovation, and how sometimes we think of those as such separate things. But they're all working with the same medium, the internet. And by 1997, the internet artists, or the net artists, have kind of collaborated to finalize their definition of net art. So this graphic was created by another arts duo called MTAA, and it shows that internet art is not just about the computers where you make the stuff, but the fact that the computers are connected via the internet, and that each user has to visit your site and have a unique experience and interaction with the site. And this is around the time when I am finally here. So before I wasn't on the earth and they had done all this innovative stuff. By the late 90s, I'm finally here and I can enjoy this stuff for myself. All right, so now we're on to section 2, WordPress then till now. So another thing you probably noticed or didn't notice is that I didn't mention WordPress in the first part. So all of those artists, and the New York Times as well, were doing all that before CMS was a thing and before WordPress was a thing. So this goes along also with the the larger history of the internet, just so we can step back and look at the bigger picture. Around 1991, again, the first internet service provider is released. Around 2003, so a little bit before Facebook, is when WordPress was invented. And now we're beyond 2021, and the amount of websites has increased exponentially once WordPress has came on the scene. Also, the sites that you see in this graph, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, those are not just websites, but platforms. They allow for a lot of user-generated content. So that plus WordPress has really increased the amount of user-generated content that's online. So WordPress started 20 years ago. I actually, for the Philly WordPress Meetup, we had a 20th anniversary party. So I don't know if you guys had one of those yet, but happy birthday, happy anniversary, WordPress. So WordPress started in 2003. It's an open source content management system made of themes, plugins, media, database, the WordPress core, allowing us to create websites and put content online. It helps us in the bigger picture by making it easier to build websites, which makes it easier to build companies, either internet companies or brick and mortar companies. You can do a lot online to help out in person and vice versa. It also makes it easier to publish content. In fact, the mission of WordPress is to democratize publishing. And it makes it easier to connect to people. The internet is a web of connections. So this is also goes along with Web 1, Web 2, and Web 3, which are words to explain, I guess, different eras of the internet. So in Web 1 is when most of the early internet artists were working. And that was back when this arrow going up towards the cloud was very skinny. So there was not a lot of user-generated content online. Web 2 is when WordPress came on the scene. And by then there was about the same amount of user-generated content as there was published content online. So things are getting a little bit more even. And by Web 3, there's still a significant amount of user-generated content, but the main difference with Web 3 is the amount of users and the frequency in which we are on the internet and using an internet-connected device. Web 3 talks about how the internet is ubiquitous. It's everywhere, using it all the time, and it's influencing every part of our life. So Web 3 is kind of where we are now. So web history, some of the major factors in addition to WordPress are smartphones and personal computers. The computers got smaller and smaller and more accessible. Social media and the ease of uploading our own content. And blockchain as well, which is a very revolutionary way to handle assets online. But we don't have to get into that. That's a lot more confusing stuff. So WordPress has always been a major factor of democratizing publishing, and always been one of the um, most used paintbrushes in the largest paintbrushes in the paint, uh, the biggest paintbrush in the paint kit. I'm not sure how to reference this. If all of the tools that we use to create websites and create things online are paintbrushes, WordPress would be the one that we use the most, and it would be the best one, the biggest. Yeah, you get it. So WordPress is around 43% of market cap. So about 43% of the internet uses WordPress. So it's the most popular paintbrush. WordPress, it revolutionized the web. It's very transparent in that it's open source, it's democratized in that same way, and there are many no-code options starting from the very beginning, but even more so now. And then just to explain more, explaining these histories in parallel timelines around this time, during Web 2, approaching Web 3. Internet art using the capital I, or net art using the capital N, that era has formally ended, or it's now in the past. So art historians and historians in general, we have to describe a certain era using, a finite definition, and usually we give that era a capital letter term. And when it ends, we can continue using the term, but to show that it's not that same original era, we used a lowercase letter. So the original internet artists were working around up until like the 2005 to 2010. After that, there was still internet art being made and internet art around, but it wasn't using the capital I. We weren't grouping those artists and that artwork in the same way that we talked about Mark America and Olieli Alina. So this is very similar to how we talk about other forms of art in history. So minimalism, when it started in the 50s or 60s, those artists, they were calling themselves minimalists, and they were very consciously creating this definition. And they were talking amongst themselves and very intentionally creating minimalism. And then afterwards, a lot of people were still using and doing minimalism and creating minimalist art. But we now use the lowercase m to describe that. All right, so here's some newer examples of internet art, again with the lowercase I. I feel like I over-explained that. I think you guys understood that before I had to explain it. All right, so Ani and Susie, I would call what they make platform art, because they use or reference platforms and how those platforms work. And the way they do it is absolutely hilarious. And they've also worked with corporations and big brands and the platforms themselves in marketing capacities. So they're a good example of how art can be used in kind of more business-minded ways. So this demo I'll show you is called Amazon Dating, and I already have it loaded here. All right. So this is Amazon Dating. What they've done is they've taken the concept of an e-commerce website and they've added the content from a dating site. So it's like they've turned Tinder into Amazon. And it's absolutely hilarious. Like you can click onto a product or a person and see the product from every angle, and you can even scroll down and see different reviews. of the people. And it's funny, but it's also really insightful, because if you think about it, like a lot of uh, dating apps and dating platforms today make it feel like you're just adding a human into a cart and clicking checkout or something. It doesn't feels less personal. But all they've done is change the interface of a dating app into that of an e-commerce store. I'll go to the next example. So this is Shawnee Michael Holloway. Her artwork is really interesting because it critiques power structures in different, conceptual ways, and she likes to focus on different identities uh, within the power structures. So I will admit that viewer discretion is advised when going through her website, but you should definitely spend more time on her website and go through it at your own pace. Um, her stuff is pretty edgy, but it's also very insightful and academic. She's a professor at, I think she used to be in Chicago, but now she's in Virginia. But her stuff is pretty academic as well. So you can read a lot about her work and the inspiration behind it on her website. And the last newer example I'll show is Raphael Rosendahl. He is still working into the present, and he was one of the first to sell websites as art. And he did this just by selling the URL of the site where the artwork was hosted. So whoever owned the URL had owned the website. So here is his website, and I'll click on one of these examples just to show you his style of art. It's very playful, very simple, at least compared to some of the examples I've been showing. These balls are just bouncing around. I can click on one and it'll turn to the other color and it'll stop bouncing. And yeah, that's about it. You can do this all day or just for a few seconds, or you could do whatever you want with it. But most of his artworks are interactive in the same way. And he's got quite a few on his site here. Let me go back to my site, to my presentation. Okay, so now that we know and we're aware of this rich history of internet art, and we can see that people are still experimenting with the web in similar ways. And now that we're here, we're all WordPress people. We're all WordPress users. We can easily make a lot of different things with the web. Again, these artists are using the same tools that we use every day as WordPressers for our own business purposes or hobbies. They're already using the same medium and the same tools. But so what now can we do with this knowledge and with the inspiration from them? So that's the same to me as asking about, like, what is art's function? What is net art's function today? So art, we look at art and we look at the history of art and we look at history in general to understand the past and see how people lived in the past and what they did in the past and how they solved problems in the past to experiment to understand where we are today. And how we can do the same that they did to move into the future and imagine our own future, a better future. So we can take the inspiration that they have given us, how they have fearlessly used this new medium of the internet and computers to just create things and have fun with things, rather than be hesitant and not participate in history and culture. So I mentioned before that I think it's really helpful to look at history from, you know, a certain perspective. So it's cool how all of this stuff has happened even right before I like really started my career. So 2016 is when I first worked at the art museum, and last year I you know went back to the same place and took that same picture. But all of this that happened even before I got to that point. And you know, one of the reasons I love giving this presentation, and I love you know, looking back at history and the original net artists from the 90s, um, it's it's well, it's explained well in this quote. So only when users start to express themselves with these technical innovations do they truly become relevant to culture at large. So the internet is ubiquitous. Again, we're in Web3 and the internet's all over the place. We're online all the time, and technology is essentially taken over. But if we think of the internet and computers and all the other this technical innovations as just like an artistic medium that we can play around with, it's not so intimidating. It's inviting. So let's think of WordPress as a paintbrush, and let's think of tech as some kind of artistic medium that we can just play around with. And that's how we can stay relevant. As tech takes over, we can stay relevant to culture at large. So quickly, I'll show you my interpretation of Grammatron. So again, in the same vein as the internet artists, I wanted to use technology that is new to create art. So I tried to create hypertext literature using ChatGPT to create the story. So I'll just click into a couple screens. I gave ChatGPT the prompt, like, you know, if Abe Golem was a novelist in this new metaverse world, explain, you know, what might happen or the world around him. And this is what it gave me. So Abe Golem is a writer living in the metaverse, where he spends his days exploring the endless possibilities of digital worlds. For Abe, the metaverse is a playground where anything and everything is possible, and he often finds himself lost in its endless possibilities. I think it sounds, I mean, all right. It's not as great as the original Grammatron. It's not as, it's just not as good. It's also a little short, but it's all right. And I'll click into another link just to see what happens. Abe Golem's books usually have happy endings, but there are also times when the ending is bittersweet. This is because Abe understands that life is full of ups and downs, and that sometimes happy endings don't always happen. But no matter what, Abe always tries to leave his readers with a sense of hope and possibility. It's nice. It's all right. Well, we don't have the time to go through all of it, but what I would say is that, you know, by page 2 or 3, a lot of the sentences and phrases are getting repeated because, well, I mean, it's ChatGPT. It's not, you know, Mark America, but it's also me feeding ChatGPT, and I am not a novelist. I don't really know how to write novels or how to write hypertext literature. So of course, you know, it gives what it gets. So it's not necessarily just because I'm using ChatGPT doesn't mean I can transform myself into a hypertext novelist like Mark America. However, if Mark America were to use this tool, he could probably do a lot more with it when creating hypertext literature. So in other words, let me go back to the presentation. In other words, as Mark America says, my focus is and has always been to look at the role that techne or technicity plays, to really investigate the prosthesis I am. So what he's saying here is that he looks at the way that technology is a prosthesis. It expands or adds on to his current capacity, his current, person. So it only enhances and adds onto. It doesn't transform. So in other words, because I'm not a novelist, just this extra tech of AI doesn't transform me into a novelist. However, I am, a product designer and I am a public speaker, so maybe I can use AI and other tech in that way, and it'll really help me there. But he's always interested in looking at the ways that new tech can help him as an artist and really expand our capacity and our creative capacity. All right. So I hope that the art that I've shared with you today and the artists have inspired you to go forth and make art. Use WordPress as a paintbrush, and approach new technologies fearlessly. Have fun with it and see what you can come up with. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks again for inviting me to this meetup, because again, this is one of my favorite topics to talk about. As you can tell, I definitely geek out about this topic quite a bit. So thank you so much.
Wow, thank you so much, Rachel, or Win. This was amazing. It took me back a bit because I remember ASCII art from the early 90s. I'm that old, but yeah, it's a good walk down memory lane. I really enjoyed this presentation. I don't know about everybody else, but this was kind of fun.